Imagine this. You wake in the dead of night, heart pounding against your ribs, a nameless dread clutching at your throat. The clock reads 3:17 a.m., that haunted hour when the veil between consciousness and the subconscious grows thin. In this moment of raw vulnerability, a thought crystallizes with devastating clarity. What if everything I've been working toward is wrong? You've followed the prescribed path. Education, career, relationships, the endless pursuit of self-improvement. You've read the books, listened to the podcasts, applied the techniques. You've torn yourself down and rebuilt yourself countless times. And yet, here you are awake in the darkness, haunted by the persistent feeling that something fundamental is missing. What if this discomfort, this perpetual sense of incompleteness, isn't a sign of failure? What if the very metrics by which you've been measuring your progress are flawed at their foundation? Consider the chrysalis, that mysterious cocoon where caterpillars dissolve into cellular soup before reconstructing themselves as butterflies. If that chrysalis could feel, would it interpret its dissolution as death rather than transformation? Would it mistake its necessary disintegration for destruction? We live in a culture obsessed with wholeness, with fixing what's broken. But what if brokenness itself is not the enemy? What if the cracks, the failures, the moments of falling apart are not evidence of something gone wrong, but rather the essential conditions for becoming? The ancient Japanese practice of kintsugi repairs broken pottery with gold, transforming fractures into the most valuable part of the piece. What if your perceived brokenness is not a flaw to be fixed, but the very birthplace of your becoming? This is the great paradox we must confront. Could it be that in our desperate attempts to repair ourselves, we are actually interrupting the most profound transformation of our lives? This paradox that our pursuit of wholeness might be precisely what's keeping us fractured isn't merely a modern dilemma. It's rooted in deep psychological and philosophical currents that have shaped human consciousness for centuries. Friedrich Nietzsche understood this when he wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." He recognized that creation requires destruction. That order emerges from chaos. Yet our contemporary culture has rejected this fundamental wisdom, replacing it with a sanitized narrative of perpetual self-improvement that denies the necessary darkness of transformation. Carl Jung called this our shadow, those parts of ourselves we've rejected, suppressed, or deemed unacceptable. Until you make the unconscious conscious, Jung warned, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The shadow isn't a defect, it's an essential part of the psyche. By labeling portions of ourselves as broken or flawed, we're not healing, we're fragmenting. Consider how our very language betrays us. We speak of fixing ourselves as if we were malfunctioning machines rather than evolving organisms. We talk about overcoming our challenges, suggesting they are enemies rather than teachers. We aim to eliminate our weaknesses, as if strength could exist without vulnerability. This mechanistic view of human development, rooted in industrial age thinking, treats pain, doubt, and struggle as manufacturing defects rather than essential catalysts. Viktor Frankl, who found meaning in the unimaginable suffering of Nazi concentration camps, understood that suffering itself can be the crucible of purpose.
"What is to give light must endure burning,"
he observed. Yet our culture pathologizes pain, treating it as something to be medicated, managed, or escaped rather than integrated and transformed. The existentialists like Sartre and Camus recognize that meaning isn't something we discover, but something we create through our choices amid uncertainty and absurdity. Yet we've developed a self-help industrial complex that promises certainty, clarity, and effortless transformation, a mythology that leaves us feeling even more inadequate when real growth proves messy and non-linear. Arthur Schopenhauer understood that desire creates suffering, that our constant striving for something better, different, more perfect is itself the source of our discontent. Yet our consumer culture has weaponized this truth, simultaneously creating the wounds of inadequacy and selling the supposed cures. This is the hidden problem. We've internalized a narrative of self that demands constant renovation while denying the very conditions necessary for genuine transformation. We've been sold a vision of human development that is fundamentally at odds with the organic, cyclical, often chaotic nature of authentic growth, like a butterfly trying to improve its caterpillar form, rather than surrendering to metamorphosis. we exhaust ourselves trying to perfect what must actually be released. What if this constant feeling of brokenness isn't a problem to be solved, but a signal to be heeded? What if it's not evidence of failure, but the first whisper of a profound invitation? This misguided paradigm of perpetual self-improvement extracts a toll far greater than we realize. Like an autoimmune disease where the body attacks itself, we've turned our natural growth processes against our own well-being. The first casualty is authenticity. When we're constantly trying to fix ourselves, we implicitly reject who we are in this moment. We split into the judge and the judged, the improver and the improved, the idealized future self, and the perpetually inadequate present self. This internal fragmentation makes genuine self-acceptance impossible. As psychologist Carl Rogers observed, the curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. The neurological consequences are equally severe. Our brain's negativity bias, evolutionarily designed to scan for threats, becomes hyperactivated when directed inward. The cognitive bias known as the Dunning-Kruger effect ensures that the more skilled we become at self-analysis, the more flaws we perceive. Meanwhile, confirmation bias guarantees that we'll find evidence of our brokenness everywhere we look. We've essentially reprogrammed our neural architecture to perpetuate our own suffering. Socially, this paradigm isolates us precisely when we most need connection. Shame, the emotion of perceived defectiveness, drives us into hiding, creating what sociologist Brené Brown calls the unspoken epidemic of shame. We present carefully curated versions of ourselves to others, maintaining the collective illusion that everyone else has it together. This mutual performance of wholeness leaves each of us feeling uniquely broken, unaware that our isolation is actually our most universal experience. Spiritually, this framework blocks the very transcendence it claims to pursue. As philosopher Alan Watts noted, the more you try to get rid of your so-called evil side, the more you build it up. Traditional wisdom traditions across cultures recognize integration, not elimination, as the path to wholeness. The Christian concept of grace, Buddhist non-duality, Taoist harmony of opposites all point to acceptance rather than rejection as the foundation of transformation. Perhaps most insidiously, this paradigm has commodified our becoming. Every insecurity becomes a market opportunity. Every moment of doubt becomes an occasion to consume another book, course, or coaching program. Our very discomfort has been monetized, creating perverse incentives against genuine resolution. As Aldous Huxley predicted in Brave New World, people are happy when they get what they want, but happier still when they want what they get. The ultimate unseen consequence is existential, a profound disconnection from life's natural rhythms. Nature doesn't improve, it evolves through cycles of growth and decay, creation and destruction. The oak doesn't judge the acorn as deficient. Winter doesn't reject summer as flawed. Yet we've come to see our own seasons of dormancy, disintegration, and darkness as problems rather than essential phases in our becoming. What would happen if you stopped interrupting this cycle? What if the very thing you're trying to escape is actually the doorway to your next evolution? To rebel against this paradigm requires more than replacing one set of self-improvement tactics with another. It demands a fundamental revolution in how you relate to your own existence. Begin with radical acceptance, not as resignation, but as recognition of reality's starting point. When Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron says, "Start where you are," she's not offering platitudes but profound strategy. True change begins with embracing what is, not wishing for what isn't. This isn't passive acceptance, but active engagement with the full spectrum of your experience. Consider what happens when you stop treating parts of yourself as enemies to be conquered. The psychologist Richard Schwartz, founder of internal family systems therapy, discovered that our fragmented parts, those aspects we label as broken, immature, or problematic, actually serve protective functions. When approached with curiosity rather than contempt, these parts reveal their wisdom and transform naturally. The inner critic becomes the discerning guide. The fearful child becomes the authentic, vulnerable self. Look to the wisdom of ancient paradox. The Tao Te Ching teaches that when I let go of what I am, I become what I might be. This isn't about abandoning responsibility, but releasing attachment to fixed identity. Mystics across traditions have recognized that transformation happens not through accumulation of virtue, but through surrender of certainty. As St. John of the Cross described in The Dark Night of the Soul, spiritual growth often requires passing through periods of confusion, emptiness, and apparent regression. Reclaim the power of your attention. Neuroplasticity research confirms that your brain physically reshapes itself around what you consistently focus on. When you constantly scan for brokenness, you literally wire yourself to perceive inadequacy. Redirecting attention toward emergence rather than deficiency doesn't deny challenges, but reframes them as portals rather than problems. Study those who've embraced their becoming. Maya Angelou didn't overcome her history of trauma by rejecting it, but by integrating it into her evolving identity. Steve Jobs credited his greatest innovations to periods of failure and exclusion. Nelson Mandela described how prison, rather than breaking him, revealed his true capacity for leadership and forgiveness. These weren't people who fixed their brokenness, but who alchemized it into gold. Practice cyclical rather than linear thinking. The ancient symbol of the Ouroboros, the snake eating its tail, represents the eternal cycle of destruction and rebirth. Linear progress is a modern myth. Real growth spirals, revisiting similar themes at deeper levels. What looks like regression is often preparation for breakthrough. Embrace embodiment. The body knows what the analytical mind often misses. Somatic practices from mindful movement to expressive arts access wisdom beyond cognitive understanding. Through the body, you can experience directly how tension seeks release, how holding creates pain, how surrender precedes renewal. The body doesn't analyze its processes, it simply allows them to unfold. Perhaps most radical is embracing uncertainty as the fertile ground of possibility. When Keats described negative capability, the capacity to remain in mysteries and doubts without irritable reaching after fact and reason, he was describing precisely the mindset that enables transformation. Your certainty about who you are is the very thing limiting who you might become. This rebellion isn't easy. It requires swimming against powerful cultural currents, confronting your deepest fears of inadequacy, and surrendering the illusion of control. But ask yourself, what has the alternative offered you? Has treating yourself as a perpetual improvement project delivered the peace and wholeness it promised? What awaits on the other side of this rebellion is not perfection, but liberation, not the absence of challenge, but a fundamentally different relationship with it.
Are you ready to stop interrupting your metamorphosis?
Here then is the ultimate truth that changes everything. You were never meant to arrive. There is no final state of completion, no finished self to achieve, no moment when you will finally become whole. This isn't because you are perpetually deficient, but because you are fundamentally alive, and life, by its very nature, is constant becoming. The caterpillar doesn't fail at being a caterpillar when it enters the chrysalis. The seed doesn't break when it splits open to allow the shoot to emerge. These aren't metaphors, they are the literal reality of how living systems evolve. You are not a machine with parts to fix, but an ecosystem in constant flux, responding to changing conditions, shedding what no longer serves, experimenting with new possibilities. Consider the implications of this shift. What if discomfort isn't evidence that something is wrong, but that something is happening? What if periods of confusion, doubt, and disintegration aren't detours from your path, but the path itself? What if the very experiences you've been trying to escape are actually the birthplaces of your deepest wisdom? The ancient Vedic texts describe this as neti, neti not this, not this. True awakening comes not from finding the right answer, but from releasing attachment to all answers. The Zen tradition calls this beginner's mind approaching experience with openness rather than preconception. These aren't abstract philosophies, but practical descriptions of how consciousness evolves. Your suffering has never been the result of your brokenness, but of your resistance to breaking open. Your pain has never been punishment for failure, but invitation to expansion. Your doubts have never been evidence of weakness, but the stirrings of deeper wisdom. The darkness has never been absence of light, but the gestational space where new light is conceived. This truth doesn't exempt you from effort or responsibility. Quite the opposite, it demands full engagement with the process of living. But it fundamentally transforms the nature of that engagement from struggle against reality to dance with it. As theologian Howard Thurman said, "Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it, because what the world needs is people who have come alive. Look at your life through this lens. Those heartbreaks that seemed to shatter you actually expanded your capacity for compassion. Those failures that seemed to define you actually freed you from limiting identities. Those periods of lostness that seemed interminable actually reoriented you toward authentic purpose. It wasn't despite these experiences that you grew, but through them. This isn't positive thinking or reframing, it's a fundamental recognition of how living systems work. Resilience research confirms that post-traumatic growth isn't exceptional but common. Neuroscience demonstrates that challenge and novelty, not comfort and certainty, drive cognitive development. Ecological studies show that disruption often precedes greater diversity and resilience in natural systems. You are not broken. You have never been broken. What you've interpreted as brokenness has always been breaking open the necessary dissolution of old forms to make way for new life. Your discomfort has never been a sign that you're doing life wrong, but that life is doing you right. The irony is that accepting this truth doesn't diminish your capacity for change, it amplifies it. When you stop exhausting yourself trying to fix what isn't broken, you liberate that energy for authentic becoming. When you stop rejecting parts of your experience as unacceptable, you gain access to the wisdom they contain. When you stop fighting against the current of your own transformation, you're carried by it. Tonight, when you wake in that dark hour before dawn, heart pounding with nameless dread, remember, this too is not brokenness but becoming. This discomfort is not punishment but invitation. This darkness is not the absence of light, but the space where new light is being born. You're not broken, you're breaking open. You're not lost, you're emerging. You're not failing at being, you're succeeding at becoming. And in this recognition lies not just comfort, but liberation, not just acceptance, but radical aliveness. For when you no longer need to wage war against your own becoming, you can finally channel that energy into creating, connecting, contributing not from obligation or inadequacy, but from the overflow of your own unfolding.